download time. It's weekly download time. It's weekly download time. Oh yeah, it's download time. Yeah, it's download time. And now we're going to learn some stuff. Alright, what's up everybody? This is a bonus episode of the weekly download. I like to do little bonus episodes here and there. And this is an important thing that we got to talk about because I am unfortunately I have to cut a lot of the tracks from the Jamaica mixtape because of harshness in the mix and in the sounds, and it's really unfortunate. I'm definitely going to reach out to all of these people, but there's some real problems with the harshness, and I think that, you know, harshness, you need to be really, really careful of harshness, because if a track has harshness in the mix and you play it on a giant sound system, people will wonder what the fuck you were doing on that stage. Like, it is really, like, if you make the sound system sound bad, that is like the sin of electronic music, is to play music on the sound system that makes the sound system sound actively bad. Because when you're listening on, like, you know, 50,000 watt sound system, it's really, like, it's great to have bass at that volume and to have the sound just take over your whole body and everything, but you got to be fucking careful when it's up that loud, because if you have left harshness in your mix and you're blasting harshness at that kind of volume, people will literally, like, cover their ears and leave, you know? So it's really, really, really important that all the music that you're making, you know, when you're making it, all the music that you're making is not harsh on a big sound system, and that you guys are all, and girls, are all representing the dojo to the fullest. So I had a conversation with Matter, because Matter, he's a great producer, but he had a problem with harshness too. I used to have a problem with harshness. You know, if you have this problem, don't feel bad. But I had a conversation with Matter the other day, and I realized that the reason why he wasn't hearing a lot of the harshness in his tracks was because he was listening really, really quiet, right? And listening quiet is really good. You'll see a lot of the mixing books will tell you to listen really quiet when you're mixing, and that will help you with your leveling. Like, I find leveling much easier to do when it's quiet, and a quiet mix will always sound good loud, but a mix that's done while your speakers are loud is not always going to sound good quiet. You know, like, there's this thing called the Fletcher-Munson curve that you should know about. I'll look it up, Fletcher-Munson curve. I'll look it up here on Wikipedia. But basically, what happens is, oh, this is not Wikipedia. Let's see if I can find the curve, a diagram of the curve. I'd probably, oh, okay, here, where's Wikipedia? Okay, so here we go. Here's the Fletcher-Munson curve. So basically, what is happening here is this is showing the difference that volume makes on the way you perceive different frequencies, right? And the louder music is, the kind of flatter the response is going to seem. But the quieter music is, you only really hear, like, the very, very highs, and sometimes, like, the very, like, this is sub. You don't really hear sub at all, right? But you hear the highs. So that's why, like, you know, if you're listening and someone's playing music really quietly, all you can hear is, like, you know, like hi-hats, right? It's because of the Fletcher-Munson curve. So basically, when you're listening quiet, you know, everything sounds really, really, like, it's good for leveling, and, you know, you'll make a mix that will translate well, but a lot of the time, you're not able to actually perceive what is going to be painful at those volume levels. Like, if you're monitoring at, like, 70 dB or less, you know, 70, 80 dB, you know, conversation volume, you're not going to do any hearing damage at that volume, so you're not going to know what's harsh, right? But when you are monitoring, you should not only monitor quiet, you should also turn it up really loud so that you can hear where the painful frequencies are happening, and then you can strategically kind of dip out those frequencies on the EQ. Often dipping them out before the compressor is a good idea. Most of the mixing books will tell you EQ after the compressor because you want the compressor to be working on the full signal. But the thing to understand is that, like, when you're compressing, compression doesn't always affect all of the different frequencies at the same way, and compression can really change the equalizer curve of a sound. So, like, let's take a drum sound, for example. When you strike like a snare drum or a kick drum, there's lots of different frequencies in a snare drum or a kick drum, but the way those frequencies are distributed over time, you'll notice that the beginning of the drum sound has a lot more of the high frequencies, like the beater noise in the kick or the stick noise in the snare when you strike the snare has, the higher frequencies are at the beginning, and then it slowly kind of trails off to more like mids and lows as you come to the end of the sound, right? So when you're compressing a sound, let's say, for example, that you're not letting any of the attack through on a sound, right? Because the compressor, where you get like the snap in the drum, is from turning the attack up, so that the compressor is allowing an uncompressed transient on the drum sound before it compresses the rest of the sound. I get into a little bit of that in the Expanding Overcompressed Drums weekly download, and then also in the Multi-Band Transient Shaping weekly download. But it's not like, because the frequencies are not always the same, like the sound does not have a flat frequency response. When you are limiting something, especially, you can kind of lose some of the highs, and the highs can kind of change. Well, also, the inverse can happen. Like, for example, with a vocal, usually the sibilants, the s and the ts kind of sounds are naturally much quieter when a person is speaking. But when you've compressed that vocal and evened out the volume levels throughout the vocal, a lot of the time these higher frequency sounds, the sibilants, can come up but a lot, and you need to use what's called a de-esser afterwards. When the de-esser is a compressor that is, the side chain on that compressor is only triggered by the sibilant frequencies around like 8K or whatever, the really harsh kind of those sorts of sounds, and then the compressor will dip and turn those sounds back down, so that the first compressor that's evening out the level of the vocal is compressing it like to get it to an even volume level, but then the de-esser is taking just the S's and the T's and the other harsh sounds and turning them down, right? Well, this doesn't just happen on vocals, it can also happen on drums, for example. If you compress a whole drum beat, usually your hi-hats should be much, much quieter than the main kick and snare. But after a lot of compression, the hi-hats will be closer to the same volume as the main kick and snare, and they'll be starting to get boosted and harsh, right? And this is true at every stage of compression, including mastering. And a lot of the time when I see you guys out there and you're really squashing your masters, like there's a couple of these, like this Like Water master, it's a great track. I love the track, but if you listen to this loud, it will fucking destroy your ears. So that one I'm gonna have to get him to redo, and then the Brian Hirano is gonna have to redo his, and same thing with Vaden. All of these tracks have just like, because like when you first learn how to get things loud, it's really exciting. It's an exciting point in your production, because compression, more than any other effect, compression really shapes your sound as electronic music or a hip-hop producer. Compression is such an important part of what makes your mixes sound like you know. So when you first get into compression, the tendency is to overdo it. I mean, it's the same thing like with anything. Like, as soon as you get into automation, you're automating the fuck out of everything. As soon as you get into auto-tune, you want to put auto-tune on every sound. As soon as you get into vocoders, all your tracks have vocoders. Like, that's cool, that's normal, that's like a part of growing as a producer. But I really want you guys and girls to understand that harshness is very much like a constant battle, eliminating harshness. And you're gonna have to basically periodically during your process turn your speakers or your headphones up to the point that it actually hurts and you're actually doing hearing damage. I normally would not advocate hearing damage. I am a big believer in earplugs. It shows. I wear earplugs all the time. It shows. And I definitely keep your monitors, your studio monitors down most of the time when you're producing. But periodically, especially during mixdown and mastering, you gotta crank that shit up and really imagine that you're at a concert or a club or a rave or festival or whatever, and crank it way the fuck up and listen and find where those frequencies are hurting, right? And because a lot of this harshness comes from compression, this is why I say you should EQ the harshness before it goes into the compressor. You might have to EQ it after too, depending on the nature of the compression that you're putting it through. But usually on my chains I'll have an EQ at the very end that is for just balancing and EQing the sound, and then I'll have an EQ before any kind of major processing. So let's say you have a dry wet chain with a reverb in it, I always EQ on the way into the reverb, because the bottom, it just gives you mud in a reverb, and the top can make the reverb too noticeable. If there's too much high-end reverb, it makes the reverb really obvious. So usually you want to take a bit of the highs down on the reverb, and you definitely want to take the lows out, sometimes even up to 600, right? But, so if I'm running it into a reverb, I'll EQ it, but sometimes I even have an EQ very, very beginning at the chain. I'm not doing any huge cuts there, but I'll do little dips before the compressor. I'll find what frequency is harsh later in the track. I'll find what frequency is harsh at the end of the chain, and then I'll go and take a little bit of that frequency out before it goes into the compressor, and it'll kind of make the compressor pump that loud, harsh frequency up a little bit less, right? So I find that that's really, that's a good idea, and then I'll EQ at the end. And then when you're scanning for harshness, definitely use your ears and turn it up, but I'll show you how to do it. And I just I want to apologize to the people whose tracks are in this channel that says no. I really don't mean to single you out like this, but I do really need to have an example of this problem for people. I want you all to know I think you're wonderful producers. I love your music. Every one of you, like Water and Vaden and Hirano, I've actually DJ'd your tracks in my live sets before. So I want you to know that I love you guys. I don't mean to single you out. I just need an example. So we'll start with Brian's track here. And I'm going to put a limiter on the master because it's going to get kind of loud and crazy. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to turn Brian's track down 6 dB here. And then I'm going to show you how to scan for harshness. I'm just going to use the Ableton EQ, but I often use FabFilter Pro Q for this. And a lot of these kind of surgical EQ tasks, I like to have an EQ where you can really see what you're doing and stuff. So I normally use FabFilter Pro Q for this, but in this instance I'm going to use the Ableton EQ just so that those of you who are using the Ableton EQ will be all good with that. So I'm going to expand it up here and bring it up, and then what we're going to do is we're going to scan through this sound with a really, really big peak, bigger than you'd ever use for EQing, and then really fucking narrow. And we're going to listen for where the painful spots are, where the harshness is, and I'll show you how to identify those frequencies. Now, I can't solve this problem with the harshness in these tracks because these are mastered tracks. If I apply any kind of dramatic EQ to them, it's going to fuck up the mastering, but I'm just showing you this so that you can, I would never apply these EQ curves to a master track. I'd go into the mixdown and fix it. But let's say that you're in a mixdown, you're scanning for harshness, right? So I'm going to go through here and scan for harshness in this track. Yeah. Right there, you can hear there's this really strong kind of resonance. It doesn't always, because this is a very exaggerated EQ, right? It doesn't always cause that harshness, but you'll notice certain frequencies are ringing, where maybe it's in one of your effects, maybe it's from the compression, maybe it's from something, but something is causing some ringing. So it's right in the pain zone, like that area between like 2K to 4K. I call that the pain zone because that's where your ears are most sensitive. Apparently, it's because that's the frequency that babies cry at, so we're like evolutionarily, but it's also where all the clarity of sound is, like where, you know, all the consonants and articulation of words is in those frequencies. And like if you notch out that area, you can't hear the words. Like if, you know, you can't make out the words when you're listening to a vocal. But yeah, so it's in here. This area you got to be really careful of. And then any harshness, I mean, basically anything above 2K, any harshness in the highs there. But especially between 2 and 4K, and especially around 7 or 8K. Those are like super painful areas. But yeah, see, this is okay. When you get to about there, and it's pretty much throughout the track. I don't think it's one instrument. Right? So once you find one of those frequencies, then you would bring it down like a couple dB and, you know, cut. And when you're EQing, you want to do narrow cuts and broad boosts if you're going to boost, because things start going out of phase real quick when you boost. But cutting, you don't have phase problems. Okay, so then I'm going to make another one of these narrow little bands and see if I can find any other harsh spots. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Oh yeah, in here. Yeah, right there. There's another harsh one. Yeah, so then you dip that out kind of strategically. So, Brian, you're gonna have to go into your mix down and figure out like what is causing those pileups of frequencies in there. There's something that's like ringing or whatever, that the compression and stuff on the master, because you can see this track is like, it's mastered pretty loud, you know, like if I return this back up to 0, you can see it's like, I mean, it's not super squash, but yeah, it's really bringing it out. So here, let's do Vadens now. Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to put the EQ on. With this one, like all that reverb and stuff that's going on in there, all that reverb and all the highs, like this whole build-up Vaden is like, it's been so squashed, and you're not EQing your reverbs, you're not EQing your delays. You gotta EQ those things and get them like further back in the mix, because this whole, like, if you listen to this loud, this will fucking just rape your ears. Like, it's just so harsh, this mix. So you gotta go in and notch it out. Like, the harshness is all over your drums, it's all over your effects and stuff. Like, everything is just really, like, it's been pushed so much that it hurts, you know. And if you actually, like, if you turn this up to the point where it hurts, you'll be able to very quickly find those. Same thing too, like Water. I love you, Chris, man. I think you're a fantastic producer, but this is like a new style for you. And so, you know, so it's okay, but you can really hear, like right there in the pains, that shit is harsh. So there's something that needs some. Yeah, like your chord skank sound is probably doing it. Oh, there we, ow. Oh, yeah, right there. So you're gonna have to apply some subtractive EQ probably to your cymbals and stuff to kind of deal with the pileup that's going on about there. But yeah, so go through your mix down and just turn it up as loud as you can, and find those spots. And a lot of the time it's the compression that is making the harshness. and a little bit of subtractive EQ. I'm not talking a lot. Like when you do these dips, you know, we're talking like a narrow little dip like this, and just a couple dB before. And then sometimes if you find a frequency that's genuinely ringing, that there's like one specific frequency that is just like genuinely ringing, then you can use one of these notch EQs, but you want it to be really as fucking narrow as it can be just to get that frequency, because notching, it starts to cause all this kind of phasey, flangey sounding stuff. That is, you know, it can really affect the sound. But if you find one frequency that is legitimately just awful, try and narrow it down with a really, really narrow band notch and do it. Okay, cool. So I hope that helps you with your mixes. All three of these tracks, I think that if the mix down the harshness was removed and you weren't trying to push everything so loud, and like the effects and kind of background sounds were more in the background and further away in the mix, you know, if you soften them up with a little bit of like reverb or something to kind of place some of those, like those risers and like reverse crashes and shit, you can soften them a little with reverb, take away a little bit of the highs, like put a low shelf on like all the highs on those kind of harsh metallic sounds like cymbals and reverse crashes and risers. And then if you notice any of those resonant peaks, put a little dip before the compressor, and then maybe some more EQ at the end of your effects chain to kind of rein those in a bit. But all three of these are in the no pile, and they should be in the yes pile. They're great tracks, and it's the harshness that is the problem. Okay, cool. So I hope you've enjoyed this bonus lesson. Much love, everybody, and yeah, let's get those mixes clean. You know, if you're gonna make dance music, it's gotta sound good on a big sound system, and that means eliminating harshness. So crank it up. Go through your track with a fine-tooth comb at a real high volume and find all those harsh spots and get rid of them. And then because good music, if a good mix is good, it should sound good at any volume. Like, you should be able to play it on the largest sound system on earth and it should sound fucking amazing. And it should also sound good on your phone, you know? So doing this just harshness removal, you know, do it periodically, but especially during your mix down and mastering, you gotta be a fucking Nazi about this harshness, because your music's gotta sound good loud. You wanna be able to turn your music up at maximum fucking volume all the time and have it sound great, blasting. And the only way to check is to turn it up loud and see where it hurts. All right, lots of love, everybody. Don't fuck your ears up too bad. Don't produce too loud all the time, but turn it up and find your harsh spots. Okay, peace out. Love ya.